Some men retire and go fishing. I retired and kept watching. 41 years as a forensic investigator for the county will do that to you. You stop being able to turn it off. You notice the way a person's left hand goes still when they're lying. You notice when a story has too many round edges, when someone's smoothed down the parts that should be sharp. My wife, Margaret, used to say I could find the seam in a seamless room. She passed 6 years ago, and I still hear her saying it. My name is Walter. I'm 63 years old. I have one son, Daniel, who works long-haul freight logistics out of Columbus, Ohio. He drives a desk now, not a truck, but the hours are nearly as bad. And I have a grandson named Cooper. He's 9. He has his grandmother's eyes and his father's stubbornness, and he is, without question, the best thing in either of our lives. When Daniel's first marriage ended, Cooper was 4. It wasn't dramatic. It was just two people who'd grown in opposite directions and finally admitted it. Daniel got primary custody. Cooper's mother, Renee, moved to Portland and sees him summers and alternating holidays. There's no bitterness there, not anymore, just geography and shared calendars. About 2 years ago, Daniel met a woman named Sylvia at a work conference in Charlotte. She was in supply chain management. Sharp, well-dressed, funny, in that dry way that takes you a moment to catch up to. Daniel called me the night he met her, which he almost never does. I knew from the sound of his voice that this was different. They dated 8 months. She moved in. 6 months after that, they were engaged. I want to be careful here, because I know what you're thinking, friends. You're thinking I saw the warning signs and looked away, and I want to tell you honestly, I didn't. Not at first. Sylvia was warm to Cooper. She came to his soccer games. She helped with his science fair project, the one about water filtration that won 2nd place at the district level. She wasn't performing warmth, or at least, she didn't appear to be. It looked genuine, but I've spent 4 decades studying the gap between what looks genuine and what is. And there was something, not a red flag, more like a thread that didn't match. Little things. The way she'd redirect a conversation when Cooper started talking about his mother. Not jealousy exactly, more like impatience. The way she'd laugh a beat too late when Cooper said something funny, like she was watching herself laugh rather than actually laughing. The way, once or twice, when she didn't know I was in the room, she looked at him with an expression I can only describe as calculation. I told myself I was looking too hard. I told myself I'd spent so long in interrogation rooms that I'd started seeing interrogation rooms everywhere. I told myself my son was a grown man who could read his own household. I told myself a lot of things. Daniel travels 3 or 4 times a month, sometimes just overnight, sometimes a full week. When he's gone, Sylvia works from home and takes care of Cooper's school pickup, dinner, homework. That was the arrangement. It had been working, as far as anyone could see, for about 14 months. I live 40 minutes away. I have Cooper most Saturdays, sometimes Sunday. We fish. We watch old westerns that he pretends to find boring until suddenly he doesn't. We talk about things in the sideways manner that 9-year-olds and old men both prefer, circling the real subject until we land on it by accident. About 3 months ago, I started noticing something different in Cooper. Not dramatic. Nothing I could point to and say, that is the thing. But grandparents who pay attention will know what I mean when I say a child can be physically present and emotionally somewhere else entirely. Cooper had always been a talker, quick to laugh, the kind of kid who has opinions about everything, including things he knows nothing about, which I find charming in a child and exhausting in an adult. He got quieter. He stopped finishing his sentences. He'd start to tell me something and then pull back, redirect, change the subject to something neutral. School, a video game, the weather, which a 9-year-old should never be discussing unless something else is going on. I asked him once, directly. I said, "Cooper, is everything okay at home?" He looked at me for a long moment, not the look of a child who doesn't understand the question, the look of a child who understands it very well and is deciding how much to say. "Everything's fine, Grandpa," he said, and then he went back to his fishing line. I called Daniel that night. He was in Memphis. I told him I thought Cooper seemed off. He said Cooper had been a little under the weather. Nothing serious. He said Sylvia had mentioned Cooper had been sleeping more than usual. Probably a growth thing. He said, I worried too much. He said it warmly. The way you say something to someone you love, who you think is being overprotective. I said, okay. I let it sit. 2 weeks later, I drove out to Daniel's house on a Tuesday afternoon. I hadn't called ahead. That's important, and I want to explain why. It wasn't suspicion, not exactly. Daniel had mentioned that Cooper had stayed home from school the day before with a stomach ache. I'd made a pot of chicken soup that morning, Margaret's recipe, the one with the lemon and the orzo, and I thought I'd drop it off. A simple thing. A grandfather thing. I pulled into the driveway at 2:14 in the afternoon. Sylvia's car was there. So was a second car I didn't recognize. A silver sedan. I could hear music from inside, something with a lot of bass, louder than you'd expect on a Tuesday afternoon when a sick child is home. I knocked. Nobody answered for a long moment. Then Sylvia opened the door, and I saw, just past her shoulder, two women at the kitchen table with wine glasses, a cheese board, and what looked like a half-empty second bottle. It was 2:14 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Cooper was home sick. Sylvia's face went through about 4 expressions in 2 seconds, before it settled on pleasant. She said she was just having some friends over for lunch. She said Cooper was upstairs resting. She was standing in the doorway in a way that didn't exactly invite me inside. I asked if I could take the soup up to Cooper. There was a pause. Just one beat too long. She said he was sleeping, and she didn't want to wake him. She said she'd take the soup and give it to him when he woke up. She reached for the container. I am 63 years old, and I have been doing this my entire professional life. I know what a deflection looks like. I know what it looks like when someone wants you to stay on your side of a threshold. I handed her the soup. I smiled. I said to give Cooper my love. I walked back to my truck. I sat in my truck for approximately 90 seconds. Then I called my son. Daniel didn't answer. He was in a meeting. I left a message that said, call me when you get this. It's not an emergency, but I want to talk. Then I drove away. I want to tell you what I did next, because I think it matters. I did not call the police. I did not make accusations. I drove to a gas station 3 blocks away, and I sat in the parking lot, and I thought about what I had actually seen versus what I was afraid of. What I had actually seen. Sylvia drinking with friends on a Tuesday afternoon while a sick child was upstairs. That was it. That was the full inventory. It was not good. It was not the behavior of a thoughtful caregiver, but it was not, on its own, a crime. What I was afraid of. All the things I couldn't see. I drove home. I made notes. I always make notes. Old habit, and I waited for Daniel to call. He called at 7:30 that evening. I told him what I'd seen. I kept my voice level. I told him exactly what I had observed, and nothing more. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said Sylvia had called him after I left and told him I'd stopped by. She'd framed it differently. She said she'd been having a low-key lunch with friends, that she'd checked on Cooper every hour, that he'd been sleeping comfortably. Daniel asked me what I wanted him to do. I said, I want you to come home early. He said he'd see what he could do. His tone was careful, the tone of a man trying to mediate between two people he loves. I understood it. I didn't push. 3 days later, Daniel was back in Columbus, and on a call with me again. He said Sylvia had been wonderful all week, that Cooper seemed to be feeling better, that maybe I'd caught her on a bad day. He wasn't dismissing me. He was trying to resolve something he didn't know how to resolve. I said okay. I asked if I could take Cooper for the weekend. He said yes. Cooper came to my place that Friday. He was quieter than ever. We made dinner together. He likes to help with the garlic bread. Very specific opinions about the butter to garlic ratio, and we watched television, and I waited. Because that's what you do. You don't push. You create a space and you wait for what wants to come out. Around 9 o'clock, when I thought he was almost asleep on the couch, Cooper said, without looking at me, Grandpa, how do you know when something is wrong? I kept my voice very easy. I said, what do you mean, bud? He said, like, how do you know when something is actually wrong versus when you're just being dramatic? I turned the television down. I said, I think you know the difference. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said Sylvia gave him something in his juice. He said it made him feel sleepy and floaty and his head hurt afterward. He said it happened more than once. He said the first time, he thought it was the medicine she'd already given him for his cold, but then it happened again, when he wasn't sick, and it tasted the same, and afterward, he felt the same way. He said he hadn't told his dad, because he thought maybe he was being dramatic. Friends, I have sat across tables from people who have confessed to things that would keep you awake at night. I have heard things in my career that I have had to put somewhere very deep in order to function. But nothing in 41 years hit me the way those words hit me, sitting on my couch with my grandson who had just told me in his small, careful voice that he thought maybe he was being dramatic. I put my arm around him. I told him he was not being dramatic. I told him he had done exactly the right thing by telling me. I told him he was safe. And then I told him Grandpa had some things to take care of. I kept my voice calm until he fell asleep. Then I went to the kitchen and I sat at the table and I was very still for a while because the next steps mattered enormously and I could not afford to get them wrong. I called a former colleague of mine, a woman named Dr. Patricia Weil, who spent 20 years as a forensic pediatric specialist for the county before she retired. I'd worked with her on dozens of cases. I trusted her completely. I called her at 10:30 at night, and she answered, because she's that kind of person. I told her what Cooper had said. I described the symptoms, the sleepiness, the floating feeling, the headache. She asked several specific questions. How long after ingestion did the symptoms begin? How long did they last? Whether he'd experienced any nausea, whether his appetite had changed. She said, very carefully, that what I was describing was consistent with a mild, sedative compound. She said the pattern recurring in a beverage was something that needed to be documented immediately. She told me what steps to take and in what order. She told me to take Cooper to an urgent care clinic first thing in the morning, and to be very specific in what I told them and why. I wrote everything down. I did not sleep. In the morning, I made Cooper pancakes. I watched him eat. He was still quieter than he should have been. But there was something lighter in him, too. The particular lightness of a child who has finally put down something they've been carrying alone for too long. At 9 a.m., I took him to an urgent care clinic, and I told the physician on duty exactly what I had been told and why I was concerned. I used clinical language because I had it. I told them I was a retired forensic investigator, and I was requesting a full toxicology screen because I had reason to believe my grandson had been given sedatives without his knowledge or consent. The physician looked at me for a moment. Then she said, very evenly, "Let's get him in." Cooper was a champ. He doesn't love needles, but he held still, and he only made the face once. I held his hand. I stepped out while they spoke with him alone, which is standard protocol and which I encouraged. I wanted Cooper's account to be independent, on record, without me in the room. When the physician came back out, she told me she was going to make a report. Standard protocol in suspected child endangerment cases. She said this in a way that was straightforward and clear, and I told her I fully supported it. I called Daniel from the parking lot. This was the conversation I had been both preparing for and dreading. Daniel picked up on the second ring. I told him where I was and why. I told him everything what Cooper had told me the night before, what I'd observed 2 weeks ago, the call to Dr. Weil, the clinic visit. I told him in the same order I'd written it down, because emotion has a way of scrambling sequence, and sequence was what mattered right now. Daniel was silent through most of it, not the silence of disbelief. Something else, something more interior. When I finished, he said, "How is he?" I said Cooper was doing fine, and was currently eating a granola bar in the exam room. Daniel said, "I'm driving home." I said, "That's the right call." He got home in 4 hours. He went straight to Cooper, and I gave them privacy, because some things a father and son need to do without a grandfather in the room. I sat in the kitchen and drank bad coffee and waited. When Daniel came out, he looked like a man who'd been put through something and come out the other side not entirely sure what he was now. He sat down across from me. He said, "Tell me what you need from me." I told him. The next 72 hours were the most methodical I've operated in since I left the county. Daniel called a family attorney. We contacted Child Protective Services directly, ahead of their notification from the clinic, to establish ourselves as cooperative and forthcoming. Dr. Weil connected us with a pediatric therapist who had experience with exactly this kind of case and who was able to see Cooper within 2 days. The toxicology screen came back. There were traces of a common over-the-counter antihistamine in concentrations inconsistent with normal dosing. Not enough to cause serious harm. Enough to sedate a 9-year-old child so that an adult could have her friends over and drink wine without being interrupted. Enough to be documented. Enough to matter. I want to tell you about what Sylvia said, because it's important. When Daniel confronted her calmly, at home, while I was not present, she had a story. She'd given Cooper a little extra Benadryl because he'd been scratching at a bug bite. She'd done it with the best intentions. She didn't realize the dosage was too much. It was an honest mistake. She was sorry. The story was smooth. Too smooth. The round edges, I mentioned. Every rough piece filed down. Daniel is a smart man. He asked her when the bug bite had occurred. She said the previous week. He asked, which arm? She said after a pause, the left one. He asked her to show him the bug bite. There was no bug bite. Not on his left arm, not on his right, not anywhere on my grandson's body. Daniel called me that night and told me all of this in a flat, exhausted voice. He said, "You were right." He didn't say it like an accusation. He said it like a man reading the last line of a report. He didn't want to be real. I said, "I know this is hard. You're doing the right thing." The CPS investigation opened formally the following Monday. I gave a statement. Dr. Weil gave a consultation. The clinic records were submitted. Cooper spoke with the investigator twice, with the therapist present, and he was consistent, clear, and specific in the way that children are when they are telling the truth. Sylvia had retained a lawyer by then. She was cooperative on the surface, in the way people are when they know the shape of what's coming and are trying to manage it. The attorney Daniel retained had been doing family law in Franklin County for 22 years. She was efficient and she was thorough, and she did not waste time. An emergency protective order was in place within the week. Sylvia was out of the house. What I want to tell you about what I think matters most is what happened on a Thursday afternoon at a coffee shop called The Morning Bell on Broad Street in Columbus. Daniel had asked me to be there. I don't fully understand why he felt he needed me in the room, but I think sometimes a man wants his father present when he does a hard thing, even when he's old enough that he shouldn't need it. I understand that. I've felt it myself, standing at my own father's grave. Sylvia came into the Morning Bell in a silk blouse and lipstick, composed in the careful way of someone who has rehearsed composure. She had a legal pad. She sat down across from us and said she wanted to work through this as adults. Daniel put a folder on the table. He opened it. He showed her the toxicology report. He showed her the CPS intake documentation. He showed her Cooper's statements, redacted for privacy but clear in their content. He showed her the attorney's letter. Then he said, very quietly, "I want you to understand that this isn't a conversation. This is a notification." She looked at the folder for a long moment. Then she looked at Daniel. Then she looked at me. I've been looked at across tables my entire career. I know how to hold a gaze. I held it. She said, "I made a mistake." Daniel said, "You made a choice. You made it more than once." Her lawyer arrived 11 minutes late, which was bad timing for her. The conversation was already over. The documents were already on the table. The notification had already been delivered. She was formally charged 6 weeks later with child endangerment. First offense. No prior record. Her attorney negotiated. But there is a conviction. There is documentation. There is a record that follows her. It is permanent and it is deserved. Cooper finished the school year. He got a B+ on his social studies project about the Oregon Trail, which he told me about in great detail, particularly the part about river crossings, which he found extremely dramatic. He is back to having opinions about everything. He is back to not finishing his sentences because he starts the next one before the first one is done. He asked me once, a few months after everything, how I knew something was wrong. I told him I'd been paying attention. He thought about that for a second, and then said, "That's a pretty good job, Grandpa." I told him it was the best job I ever had. There is a dog now, a black Labrador named Scout, which was Cooper's idea, and nobody argued with it. Scout sleeps at the foot of Cooper's bed, and follows Daniel to the kitchen every morning, and has, in the way that dogs do, made the house feel like a house again. I take Cooper every other Saturday. We fish. We watch westerns. He has started developing opinions about which actors are the most convincing, which is both insufferable and wonderful. Last Saturday he fell asleep on the couch around 8:30, one arm hanging over the side, completely boneless the way only children can sleep, with Scout pressed against his legs. I pulled the blanket up around him, and I turned the television down, and I sat there for a while in the quiet. I want to tell you something, friends. If you'll hear it from an old man who has been watching people his whole life, pay attention to the children in your life. Not in a fearful way, not in a way that makes them feel surveilled or distrusted. Just pay attention. Create the space. Sit with them in the quiet. Let them come to what they need to say in their own time, because they will, if they trust you. Children know more than we give them credit for. They know when something is wrong. They just don't always know yet that what they know is allowed to matter. Cooper knew something was wrong for weeks before he told me. He'd been carrying it alone, because he thought he might be dramatic, because he thought maybe he was wrong, because he was trying very hard to be easy and to not make trouble. He was 9 years old, and he was trying not to make trouble. That's the part that stays with me. That's the part I think about when I'm sitting in the quiet. He's not trying to do that anymore. He tells me things now. He told me last week, completely unprompted, that his teacher gave too much homework, and that Scout had eaten one of his socks, and that the kid who sits behind him in class has a new pencil case that plays music, and it's very distracting during tests. He told me all of that in about 90 seconds. It was, without question, the finest 90 seconds of my week.